Greetings, dear listeners, to another peaceful dive into the shadowed depths of history. Whether the gentle embrace of evening falls around you, or the soft call of sleep draws near, I'm truly delighted to have you join me on this journey. Please share in the comments. Do you tune in from the serene solitude of a quiet retreat, the tranquil whispers of a forest, or perhaps amidst the calming bustle of a city winding down at dusk? If these soothing explorations into the past bring you a sense of peace and reflection, I kindly invite you to consider subscribing, as a treasure trove of additional tales from bygone eras awaits your discovery in the coming weeks and months. Remarkably, despite the most brutal and unforgiving upbringings imaginable, these resilient Viking children blossomed into some of history's most formidable and admired figures. Fierce warriors, daring explorers, and shrewd traders who left an indelible mark on the world. They ventured across treacherous seas to reach the shores of America, a staggering 500 years before Columbus ever set sail. Struck terror into the hearts of European kingdoms with their relentless raids, and constructed a lasting civilization that endured through the ages. But how did such harsh and harrowing childhoods forge these legendary individuals? This video sets out to explore the shocking and often grim world of Viking youth, peeling back the layers to reveal the 7 most brutal realities these children confronted on a daily basis. After months of meticulous research, delving deep into historical records, unearthing archaeological evidence from ancient sites, and consulting with leading experts in Viking studies, I've pieced together a vivid and authentic picture of their true lives. What you're about to discover will profoundly reshape your perspectives on parenting, the essence of survival, and the resilience of the human spirit. By the time we've reached the end, your own childhood complaints may pale in comparison to the trials they endured. So, let's set the stage by framing the Viking world, a vibrant and dynamic civilization active from 793 to 1066 AD, stretching across the rugged landscapes of Norway, the icy fjords of Sweden, and the windswept plains of Denmark. These were not the mindless savages of popular myth. They were a people with intricately woven societies, boasting advanced seafaring technologies that rivaled any of their time, and a deeply ingrained culture that placed honor and valor above even the sanctity of life itself. Yet, in a world where survival and honor reigned supreme, the very nature of childhood underwent a radical transformation. Parents were not the overprotective figures we might imagine, fretting over every scraped knee or minor tumble. Instead, they were stern guardians tasked with preparing their children for a relentlessly harsh existence, where weakness could mean certain death, where the bitter grip of winter could wipe out entire families, and where mastery of fighting skills often determined who would see the next season. You might be tempted to think, surely children are naturally resilient, capable of withstanding such challenges. But let's pause to consider the stark reality. The average Viking life expectancy hovered between 30 and 35 years, rendering the age of 10 nearly equivalent to middle age in their eyes. There was no room for a prolonged period of innocence, no gentle or gradual transition into the responsibilities of adulthood. children were thrust into a world where they either adapted swiftly to its rigors or faced the grim prospect of perishing. Archaeological discoveries paint an even bleaker picture than the written records suggest. Excavations have uncovered children's graves containing small but functional weapons, indicating that boys as young as 6 were expected to defend themselves and their communities. Evidence of intense physical labor has left lasting traces on the developing bones of these young individuals, while family burial sites reveal the devastating toll of starvation and rampant disease that swept through their settlements. The Vikings even had a specific term, NID, which translated to disgrace or shame, reserved for children who were unable to cope with the demands placed upon them, marking them as burdens to their tightly knit communities. This stands in stark contrast to the sheltered and protected childhoods we often take for granted today, where every effort is made to shield young ones from hardship. In the Viking world, childhood was nothing less than a relentless race to prove one's worth and secure a place within the family and society. The first of these brutal realities struck from the very moment these children took their first wobbly steps. They were required to earn their place in the world. There were no promises of unconditional love, no rewards handed out simply for participation or effort. Only a single piercing question mattered. What can you contribute to the survival of this family, this community, this way of life? Before we rush to judge these parents as cold or heartless, we must strive to understand the unforgiving context of their world. They lived under the constant threat of harsh climates that could turn deadly in an instant, the ever-present danger of raids by rival groups, the uncertainty of scarce food supplies that could vanish with a single failed harvest, and the relentless onslaught of diseases for which there was no modern medicine to offer relief. This wasn't an act of cruelty for its own sake. It was a desperate strategy for survival in a land where only the strong could hope to endure. As early as the age of 5, these young children were sent out to herd livestock through biting cold and treacherous terrain, their small hands gripping sticks as their only defense against predators. By 7, they were tackling the perilous chores of the farm, from mending fences to hauling water, and by 9, they were expected to master the skills necessary for self-reliance, such as crafting tools or preparing hides. Failure to meet these expectations was met with severe consequences: physical punishment in the form of beatings, exclusion from the warmth of the family hearth, or even reduced rations, because a single mistake could mean the difference between a family's survival and watching their loved ones starve through the long dark winter months. The physical toll of this labor is etched into the very bones of these children, with archaeological evidence revealing stress fractures and signs of malnutrition that stunted their growth. A particularly poignant discovery in Norway unearthed the remains of a 7-year-old boy buried alongside worn fishing tools, the wear patterns on the implements a testament to the grueling hours he spent in icy waters to sustain his family. The second of these harsh realities was of a psychological nature. one that would be considered deeply traumatic by today's standards. From a very young age, Viking children were deliberately exposed to scenes of violence and death as a means of conditioning them for the brutal life that awaited. They were brought to witness public executions, where the harsh justice of the community was meted out with hangings or beheadings. They participated in the slaughter of livestock, their small hands stained with the lifeblood of animals, and they were tasked with tending to the gruesome wounds of warriors returning from raids, wounds that would shock even the most seasoned modern medic. This was not an accidental exposure or a lapse in parental judgment. It was a calculated effort to harden these children for a world where violence was an ever-present companion. Viking parents believed that shielding their offspring from the realities of death and suffering would breed a dangerous naivety that could prove fatal in adulthood. So they chose instead to toughen them from the earliest possible age. This relentless conditioning bred a sense of dissociation in these young minds, a suppression of empathy that allowed them to view pain and death as normal parts of existence, and even planted the seeds for the berserker rages, wild, frenzied states of combat that some historians suggest were a manifestation of deep-seated trauma. The third of these shocking truths would astonish educators of today. There was no formal system of education as we understand it. No schools with chalkboards and textbooks, no trained teachers to guide young minds. Only a rugged, hands-on training grounded in the immediate needs of survival. Boys were taught to memorize the subtle hazards of rocky coastlines for safe navigation, to recognize the warning signs of approaching storms in the shifting clouds, and to track the paw prints of wolves that threatened their flocks. Girls, meanwhile, were drilled in the precise calculations required to ration grain for the long winter months, to measure out the exact amount of salt needed to preserve meat, and to monitor the dwindling days of food supplies with an eye toward the next harvest. There were no second chances or opportunities to learn from mistakes. In this environment, failing to spot a blizzard's approach could mean freezing to death. Mistaking a poisonous berry for a safe one could lead to a swift and painful demise, and botching the preservation of food could sentence an entire family to starvation. Archaeological digs have uncovered graves containing miniature versions of adult tools, tiny axes, small knives, crafted and used proficiently by children as young as 5, while a chilling sight in Iceland revealed a butchering area where even the youngest members of the community processed the remains of raid victims, their hands stained with the evidence of their grim tasks. The fourth reality was perhaps the most harrowing: the systematic training to kill, beginning as early as the age of 6. For boys, this was not a game or a playful mimicry of adult behavior. It was a rigorous regimen where they learned to wield knives with precision, to strike vital points, to throw spears with deadly accuracy, and to swing axes capable of claving skulls or severing limbs in the heat of combat. Hesitation or any sign of fear was met with harsh punishment, often in the form of public humiliation, or forced duels with real weapons that could, and sometimes did, result in death. The ultimate test of manhood came with the expectation of a first kill, typically achieved during a raid at the ages of 10 or 11, a feat witnessed and celebrated by the community, while failure to prove oneself in this way brought shame not only to the boy but to his entire family. The fifth of these crushing truths applied specifically to girls who faced a childhood defined by their role as tradable property rather than individuals with personal aspirations. They were not raised to pursue dreams of their own making, but to serve as valuable assets in the forging of alliances, the settling of debts, or the advancement of political agendas by their fathers. Their training began as early as 7, when they were set to tasks such as spinning thread while walking long distances, weaving coarse sailcloth until their hands bled from the rough fibres, and brewing ale under conditions that risked burns and injury. They were also conditioned to endure violence and abuse without resistance, preparing them to submit to husbands chosen for them in arranged marriages. Archaeological evidence tells a sobering story. Healed fractures on their skeletons suggest beatings were common. Signs of malnutrition indicate they received lesser portions of food, and the discovery of a 9-year-old girl's grave adorned with a set of keys symbolizes her early assumption of household duties, yet also her confinement to a life of servitude. Marriage often came at the tender age of 12, with motherhood following by 14, typically to men significantly older, with little regard for their emotional or physical maturity. The sixth reality was the ever-present threat of death from causes that could have been prevented with modern knowledge and medicine. Diseases ran rampant without antibiotics or vaccines, claiming lives with infections, dehydration and fevers that modern science could easily treat. The brutal winters brought the constant danger of frostbite, hypothermia and starvation, as adults prioritized the strongest members of the family for scarce resources. And then there were the raids, violent incursions that spared no one, where infants were tortured, families massacred, and skulls crushed under the weight of an axe, leaving a legacy of trauma that shaped the psyche of an entire generation. This perpetual state of danger fostered a chronic sense of hypervigilance, shallow emotional bonds formed out of the knowledge that any day could be their last, and a resilience born of necessity. Yet, remarkably, they not only survived, but thrived. How was this possible? The answer lies in the purposeful hardship that built an extraordinary resilience, a stark contrast to the shielding and protection afforded to children in the modern era. This observation raises profound questions. Are we, perhaps, coddling our children too much, depriving them of the trials that could strengthen their character? Is it possible to instill such resilience without crossing ethical boundaries or inflicting unnecessary suffering? The weak among them faced a grim fate, starved into submission, marginalized to the edges of society, or pushed into deadly tasks they were ill-equipped to handle, with mass graves serving as silent witnesses to this deliberate neglect. Those who survived adapted to the cruelty around them, hardening their hearts and losing the capacity for empathy, a transformation that ultimately contributed to the long-term doom of their society. The first of these realities known as exposure, decided a child's fate from the moment of their birth. Within days of entering the world, a Viking infant was not automatically welcomed into the family with open arms. Instead, they were laid before their father, who held the power to determine their destiny. Lifting the baby into his arms signaled acceptance and a chance at life. Turning away meant the child, judged too weak, too ill, or simply an extra mouth to feed in a year of scarcity, was left outside to perish from the elements. What might seem unthinkable to us was, according to archaeological evidence, a disturbingly common practice. Infant remains found outside settlement boundaries, buried without ceremony or grave goods, were not stillbirths or natural deaths, but healthy babies, discarded as unworthy of the community's limited resources. Even more unsettling, this decision was not always based solely on health. Healthy girls were sometimes left exposed due to a cultural preference for warrior sons, while overpopulation or a poor harvest could seal a baby's fate if feeding another soul was deemed unsustainable. Imagine the psychological imprint this left on those who survived. From their earliest conscious moments, they understood that their existence was conditional, that they had passed one test only to face a lifetime of others, and that siblings or peers might have been deemed unfit and left to die. This survivalist mindset shaped their entire worldview, setting the tone for the challenges to come. The seventh and final reality ties all these threads together. The brutal conditioning that enabled their remarkable achievements also sowed the seeds of a destructive violence cycle, one that played a significant role in the eventual fall of their civilization. This dual legacy challenges us to reflect deeply and find a delicate balance between preparing our children for the realities of the world with the compassion and care they deserve, ensuring that the lessons of the past inform a wiser future for the next generation.